Hey everybody, welcome to my presentation. For this project, I chose another Philip K. Dick story called I Hope I Shall Arrive Soon because I really enjoyed the We Can Remember It For You Wholesale. Both of these titles are sort of a mouthful, so I'm going to call We Can Remember It For You Wholesale, Remember, and I'm going to call I Hope I Shall Arrive Soon, Hope, for my mouth's sake. A little bit of background on Hope. It was written or published in 1980 in an issue of Playboy. It was published under the title Frozen Journey. This was 2 years before Philip K. Dick's death, and it was 14 years after Remember, which I think is significant for stylistic reasons that I'll go over in a minute. It's a difficult story to summarize quickly, but essentially it revolves around this main character, Victor Kimmings, and the AI of a ship that he's on. Kimmings is 200 years old, but he's kept physically still young because of modern scientific and technological advances. But he's on this ship cryogenically frozen for an interstellar trip that will take 10 years to a colony planet where he intends to start a new life. During the trip, early on, the ship malfunctions just enough for his body to warm up in his pod, enough to allow some cerebral activity, so he becomes a conscious prisoner in his own body. The ship's AI recognizes that this is going to eventually lead to his going insane if he remains in this state, so it tries to construct a 10-year reality for him to participate in a sort of dreamlike state on the way to the colony planet in order to avoid going insane. Basically, what the ship tries to do is choose a good memory from his life, from his previous life, to let him live in. The first one it chooses is early on in his marriage, which doesn't work because his own neuroses and I think his subconscious knowledge of the fact that it's a false reality kind of intrudes and projects into chaos within the reality. His house disintegrates, for instance. The ship recognizes this is a problem, so it tries to go back further to catch him at a time before he's become a neurotic adult. It still doesn't work because his childhood is filled with scenes of guilt construction, basically, where he learns about guilt. He kills a bird. He learns about the futility of life, symbolically, when he releases a bee from a spider web only to be stung. And in both scenarios, when the ship is trying to fix them, it just gets more and more chaotic. His subconscious or his neuroses or his knowledge of the falsity of the situation intrudes and deconstructs the reality. So the ship asks him, what do you want? What can I do that will be powerful enough to avoid this result? And he says he just wants the trip to be over. So the ship creates this wish fulfillment reality wherein he has landed on this new colony planet. Again, same results. In the wish fulfillment reality, his neuroses and his knowledge of the situation's falsity intrude and result in chaos. But the ship has no other way to get around this, so it continues this cycle of that reality for 10 years, which ultimately leads to his inability to discern reality when he finally does re-enter reality and exits his cryogenic state on the colony planet. There's a lot more to it, and that's a big mouthful, but that kind of gives you a basis for how it starts. Now, stylistically, there are a lot of similarities. One of the things I really liked about Remember was how accessible it was. I mentioned in my Facebook comment how it was a very cinematic story, like a lot of Dick's other stories. I think the result of that was from a playfulness in the story, with some humor, along with the fact that it had a logical chronology. This story, on the other hand, was about a more personal disorientation and a personal psychology that breaks down. And as a result, the narrative itself was a sort of reflection of that disorientation. The reader is left at points as disoriented as the main character and even as frustrated as the ship's AI. This is a very effective literary device and construction. It makes the story enjoyable, but it would have probably been problematic for a director to turn into a blockbuster Hollywood movie that had any sort of mass appeal. It's not to say that it might not be attempted. Movies like A Scanner Darkly and Primer show that we have attempted that sort of thing, but it wouldn't have that accessibility that something like Remember, which was turned into Total Recall or Minority Report or something because of that style. Also, in Hope, it's a lot grimmer, a little uncomfortable when it addresses the paranoia and the neuroses, and the loneliness that the character feels. Thematically, you wouldn't be able to read this story without knowing that it's a Philip K. Dick story. Even had I not known, just reading it, you see the Philip K. Dick, signature themes all throughout. One of which was, escapism, in comparison to the last story. Both characters, they're seeking some sort of a wish fulfillment. And Remember, Quayle wanted more because, he felt like his life was boring. He was a clerk. He was unimportant. He didn't think he could possibly get to Mars. Which we know ended up being pretty ironic. In this story, Kimmings, he wanted a new start, as we saw through the AI's construction of his reality, through his old memories. His whole life was built on his foundation of guilt, and neuroses and paranoia about that guilt. But in either case, you could tell they weren't happy with themselves. Quayle was very self-deprecating throughout the story, and then Kimmings, the fact that he kept himself young was telling of how he felt about himself, because we find later on in the story that his ex-wife, whom he still loves, did not do that. She let herself age more naturally. Another theme that comes up in both stories, of course, is the mental instability. There's paranoia in both. Kimmings, it tends to focus more on the guilt. It's a little more darker, a little more personal in his in the construction of his psychology and or the deconstruction and the Freudian look at it all. Let's see here. Some more themes. There's the intrusion of the past in both stories. The attempts to block the past, though for different reasons, just impossible. Technology tried to, block out Kimmings' childhood development of neuroses, and it didn't work. And the same went for Quayle. The alien encounter, it was still there a little bit. You couldn't get that reality to go away. That idea of reality, of course, is very Dickian, and something that I saw in these stories. Each story dealt with, reality and psychology and the subjectiveness of reality. And while there are a lot of overlapping or common themes in these stories, and the complexities of all this would be completely impossible to really cover in 10 minutes, there's one commentary that I felt that was really important in both stories, as far as comparing them. I felt like Dick was painting a picture of our psychology that was at once powerful, but very delicate. Sort of like a train, in that the momentum of the train was almost impossible to stop. It could be easily subverted by the proverbial penny on the tracks. Both stories involve the intrusion of technology into these characters' perception for the sake of reconstructing or constructing their realities. But in each case, their memories or their experiences or subconscious psychological constructs were too strong to completely subvert. And this interference or convolution resulted in chaos and insanity for both characters. So it felt to me that Dick was, in either scenario, he seems obsessed with the fact that, our psyche or our psychology is a very, very powerful, constructive force when it comes to our reality. But it's also fragile, and that our use of technology can be dangerous. I guess the question is whether Dick was giving us a cautionary tale about filtering our realities through our new obsession with science and technology, or whether he's making a statement about maybe the futility of trying to control our mental imperfections or instabilities, which is something that I know that he, struggled with. In either case, they both, were very great stories. I liked them all. I liked a lot of Dick's stories. But they also had, their differences that I think was a result of his age and maturity at the time of each. I went over a little bit, but thank you.